I want to start by just saying and reminding you that our first priority is your health, safety, and well-being, and that we will do everything we can to ensure that you are able to complete your graduate studies in the way you were planning to. We are here this afternoon to answer your questions, but I did have just a few things I wanted to say before we get to the questions. First, we all know that life as a graduate student can be very isolating, even in normal times. And these are anything but normal times. But we also tend to forget how much, even in graduate education, we depend on one another and work with one another to advance our goals and the goals of others. And as graduate students, you're part of a scholarly community that depends on one another. And the skills and knowledge that you are gaining and that you bring to the table are skills that we will all depend on in the future. In particular, the importance of evidence and reasoning to the future of the country and the world. We're here to sustain that graduate community to the best of our abilities. But it's important for you to let us know what's required to do that. I have just one other thing I want to do before we turn it over to questions, and that is to review briefly some of the resources that we have available for you that we may refer to during the course of the FAQ session, but also that we will make available once the recording of this session is available. The first one, Stuart has already mentioned, is our FAQ page, where we've compiled a lot of information relevant to current and finishing graduate students that we hope you will find helpful. We also will have resources available concerning how to continue research at this time, health and wellness resources, including the kindness.studentaffairs.uconn.edu. That's a new university-wide initiative to engage and inform students as part of during this epidemic. There are a variety of financial and food resources we want to make sure that you're aware of, and in particular, resources for international students that we want to make sure you're aware of. And finally, just a heads up for any graduate assistants who may be working remotely, there are a variety of resources available and questions to consider. But that's all I really wanted to say. We're here, as I said, this afternoon to answer your questions, not to talk. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Stuart and have him lead us through the questions.
Thank you, Kent. Our first question that we received through our FAQ page is for Kent. We've received several questions from graduate students who are concerned about the suspension of on-campus research. What advice do you have for graduate students regarding research for their thesis or dissertation?
So I guess the advice I would give, which is reiterated on our FAQ page, is twofold, that you need to think both short-term and long-term. Short-term meaning right now through the end of the semester. I'm sure there are things you can focus on that don't involve getting into a laboratory, going into the library, or direct contact, say, with human subjects. That would be things like literature reviews, analyzing data that you've already collected, collating data that you've already collected, and so on. But importantly, another thing you should be doing right now is thinking about what you will do this summer if the slowdown in research continues through June, July, August, or even beyond. And so that would mean thinking about what it means to do research in your particular field, how that research can proceed perhaps without doing some of the things you had planned on initially, and working closely with your faculty to think about those things. The last piece of advice is when we are eventually able to emerge from the current slowdown and begin work, it is unlikely that it will begin, it'll be like turning on a light switch and everything returns to normal immediately. It is likely that it will ramp up slowly. And so you should think about what are the most critical things you would need to do earliest and figure out how you can begin to do those as we begin to ramp up the research again. But again, I would urge you, don't plan on being able to do on-campus or field research until at least June or July, and possibly later than that.
Thank you, Ken. In a similar vein, and you've sort of alluded to this, another question that came in was, if a graduate student had planned research-related travel over the summer, can this still be carried out? And are there exceptions to the out-of-state travel ban? And if so, what would qualify for an exception?
So yeah, so the university guidance is currently that all university-sponsored travel, which would include travel by graduate students to perform field research, is not allowed unless there is an exception made. And those exceptions are made by appealing through the provost's office. Those requests would come to me. I evaluate each one of them, and I can't give you specifics on what would determine what will or will not be allowed. But generally speaking, the criteria would include the extent to which the travel would put the individual student at risk because they are in a high density area as opposed to a low density area, the extent to which the travel involves travel on public transport as opposed to private cars, and the degree to which that person traveling might place other people at risk.
Thank you, Ken. Lisa, several folks have mentioned that the university is holding commencement activities, both virtual and later in person for undergraduates. What is the graduate school doing for graduate students?
Thank you, Stuart. The graduate school is working closely with the university commencement events planning team. We are currently know that for sure when all of the diplomas are mailed out, they will go with diploma covers, which are usually something that the candidates who attend the ceremonies get. And then we are also planning a celebration gift to send out to you sometime over the summer. You'll get information about that. We have everybody's names who are candidates and getting ready to be audited. And then we're thinking about a weekend in October where there'll be a number of activities that people can either remote into or attend personally.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Kent, a quick question here. Will summer courses be held on campus in person, or will they be held virtually? Are there any updates on what is happening in the fall?
So what I can tell you is limited. The university did announce yesterday that all May sessions will be held online only. As far as I know, the decision with respect to summer has not yet been made, but it will obviously be made relatively soon. With respect to fall, I am told that we shouldn't expect a decision on whether or not fall will be online only for at least several weeks, perhaps more than a month.
Thank you, Ken. A question coming in for Carl is a question about submitting plans of study with committee members' signatures. Does the graduate school require an ink signature, or can paperwork be submitted with electronic signatures?
Great question. So given the times, we have switched over to electronic signatures. If you go to the registrar's homepage, registrar.uconn.edu, there is an FAQ on there on what is acceptable for electronic signatures and what is not. The basic basis of it is as long as it comes from your advisor's UConn email address, it will be accepted. And the relevant parties, if you're a master's student, certificate student, or PhD, are listed there on who goes to Sandra Sear or who goes directly to Jen Horan for submission.
Thank you, Carl. And as a follow-up here, there are some questions regarding deadlines. Could you give us a bit more information about deadlines for graduation?
Yeah, so folks that are finishing up this semester, typically they would have needed to submit their paperwork 2 weeks prior to the end of the term. We have pushed that out to the last day of the term, which is May 8th. So anybody that is a Plan A thesis master's student planning on graduating or a PhD student, you have until May 8th to submit your paperwork electronically. We recommend that you defend at least 2 weeks prior to that date so that you have time to make any edits on your documentation that you'll need to ensure that you make that deadline.
Thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you.
Megan, a few graduate students are asking what they should do if they don't have a graduate assistantship next semester in terms of enrollment. Any thoughts?
Yes. So the graduate school offers a couple special courses that can provide some enrollment flexibility to students. The first one is continuous registration. That's a 0-credit course that maintains active student status. And what that means is you aren't enrolled in coursework or research credits, but you retain access to UConn email and the library and some other resources so you can keep making progress towards your degree. That course can be really helpful if you're working on resolving incompletes or if you're in more of a writing stage for your thesis or dissertation. It also has a flat fee and doesn't incur tuition, and you can self-enroll in one of those courses. One thing to keep in mind for international students that are here on a UConn-sponsored visa is that continuous registration does require ISSS approval. It's usually only approved for the final semester of study if the student is here in the US or has an active CVIS record. So for students who do want or need to maintain full-time status, we offer Grad 6960 or Grad 5960. Those are both research courses, and they can be used towards the 15 doctoral research credits or 9 master's research credits on your plan of study. And each course is only 3 credits, but because it denotes full-time research, you're being reported as enrolled full-time. And that can be really helpful if you need to meet an enrollment threshold for financial aid or to maintain visa status. But because it's only 3 credits, it only bills as 3 credits when your tuition is calculated, even though you are a full-time student. And finally, if there's an instance where it seems like taking a break from graduate study, more than enrolling in continuous registration might be helpful, the graduate school does offer an academic leave of absence option. And that would be a temporary separation from the university that holds your spot in your program for up to 2 semesters initially. And it typically represents a time of no work towards your degree. So it does stop the clock on your time to degree while you're on leave. And there's a lot more information on all those topics on the grad school's website under info for current students, and then there's voluntary separations page.
Thank you very much, Megan. I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to ask Kent this one. Do you have any information on students as to whether they'll be getting refunds for parking passes or whether they'll carry on to next semester?
I do not have any information about that. Let's make a note and follow up on that one.
Excellent. And we'll look into that one, and we'll post any updates on our FAQ regarding that question. Before moving on to further questions, I'd like to take a moment to welcome any graduate students who have joined us in the stream over the past few minutes. For those of you who weren't at the beginning of this Q&A session, let me recap who our panelists are. We have Dean Kent Holsinger, Assistant Dean Kent Brashano, Lisa Payne, Megan Petzer, and Meg Dracos from the Graduate School. We have Jennifer King from the Office of International Student and Scholars Services, and Carl Rivers from the Registrar's Office. While we are unable to get into specific questions regarding individual departments or programs, we are discussing a variety of topics, including commencement, the issue of pass-fail, academics, research, international students, registration, deadlines on paperwork, enrollment, and graduate assistantships. Any questions that you may have missed will be uploaded to our FAQ page on the Graduate School website. Now back to the questions. Kent, we are receiving a lot of comments about the pass-fail grading for undergrads. Would you be able to tell us more about the current discussion regarding pass-fail grading for graduate students?
Thanks, Stuart. Let me start by saying that it's unfortunate that there is confusion about the availability of pass-fail grading that we are trying to clean up. The pass-fail option has always been available to undergraduate students, and it has never been available to graduate students. That being said, working very closely with the Registrar's Office over the past few days, we have developed what we believe is a way that it will be possible to offer something that will serve the interest in pass-fail grades. And I've just called an emergency meeting of the Graduate Faculty Council for Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. because doing what we envision will require a change to the Graduate Faculty Council bylaws and therefore a vote of the Graduate Faculty Council. I believe that we will be able to offer something that is similar in spirit to the pass-fail option currently available to undergraduates, and we will let you know as soon as we know one way or the other.
Thank you very much, Ken. This question is for Jen. Can graduate students return to their home countries? If they can, what do they need to know about returning in the fall?
Stuart, it's a great question, and it's important to dissect this into the 2 parts that you've mentioned. First, can students return to their home country now? In general, yes. However, students with RA-ship, for example, may need approval to continue their research abroad due to the current export control restrictions that may be in place. All students should submit your remote learning ISSS check-in form and your travel information record via the ISSS portal so that we can review your request and submit it for approval necessary. In addition, you must continue your full-time enrollment and coursework in the spring semester while overseas in order to maintain this active CVIS status and record. Secondly, then going back to what should you keep in mind upon returning for the fall? Well, in order to return for the fall, we do know that all international students must need a valid F or J visa, a valid I-20 or DS-2019 form, which is their immigration document, a valid travel signature, a valid and active CVIS record, and any travel restrictions must have been uplifted in order for you to return. So if your visa needs renewal while you're away, and you can work with ISSS to get your updated I-20 form, your document, and your travel signature before your visa interview at the embassy or consulate. And if your return will be delayed for whatever reason come fall, maybe due to travel restrictions still in place, it's important for you to reach out to us to let us know that primarily, and you'll need to follow all graduate school procedures and policies for your late arrivals. You may need to wait until a future term or semester in order to return, so we'd have to talk about that. So therefore, there is a risk if you do decide to return home, but for some and for many, this is your best and only choice right now. I also just want to point out that this information can and is posted on our ISSS website, FAQs, if you'd like to ever refer to that in the future. And you can always reach out to ISSS, to your individual advisors for remote advising or our virtual drop-in hours that we're holding every Monday through Friday, 1:30 to 3:30 in Eastern. We're always here to help you answer any other questions.
Thanks, Jen. Following up with your thought there about late arrivals, is there anything that Megan or Meg would like to add about late arrivals for students coming back to campus?
Hi, Stuart. Megan here, Meg Dracos. So it depends. I see that there's a lot of questions, and there's some questions that are coming in about incoming students. So I am going to address incoming as well as current students. We do have information on our FAQ page about what incoming students can do about late arrivals, as well as current students. We plan to have a form for students to be able to fill out that'll open up probably around, we're thinking June, that will give them some options. So if they're an incoming student, they'll have the option to defer. Let me just pull this up right here. So they'll have three options if they're an incoming student. They'll have the option to defer, they'll have the option to withdraw, and then we'll also have that late arrival form set up. So if they can come within a certain amount of time, we will be processing those on a case-by-case situation, depending on what time they plan to arrive and their extenuating circumstances. For current students, I'm going to let Megan speak about those because it is a separate process since they can't defer because they are current students already. So go ahead, Meg.
So for current students, similar to incoming ones, there will be a form set up to capture late arrival requests. Like Meg said, that'll go live in June. And the information that we're looking for, we'll make sure to share with faculty and staff so you know what information we're looking for from the students and what is being taken into consideration when considering enrollment. And then, as Mike said, it's a little different for current students because they can't defer. A student who is not able to arrive late, their best option is probably going to be a leave of absence. And they would submit that request through the voluntary separation notification form on our website.
If I could add just one thing before we move on. I also want to point out that any continuing students who hold graduate assistantships, a late arrival could be problematic with respect to them retaining their assistantships. There are considerable complications to late arrivals for someone who holds an assistantship.
Thank you, Ken. Follow-up for Jen regarding international students. If an international student graduates, but then wants to come back to campus for any events that might be held in October, how can they come back if they no longer have their F1 or J1 visas?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. That's another great question. If the university decides to hold commencement at a date at a later time in the future, and an international student has already finished or completed the degree program, and you are no longer in the United States, then you can apply for a visitor visa or B2 visa, or you can return through what is called the visa waiver program if you are from a country that is eligible. So this information is also on our ISSS FAQ page as well, but it's important to note, once a student does complete the degree and has left the US, that current I-20 immigration document you have is no longer valid at that time.
Thank you, Jen. Question from the floor. This is either for Megan or for Ken, or both. We have a question about graduate assistantships. Can GAs working remotely continue to receive a GA?
So that's one of the complications I was just referring to, Stuart. A graduate assistant who is in the United States may be able to continue work remotely if they are able to, in fact, do the service that would be associated with their work remotely. A GA who is international, there are additional complications having to do with whether or not it is research work, whether they live in a country that is subject to export control regulations, and then if they do, the type of research that they might be performing. And so will be case-by-case decisions.
Thank you, Ken. Question for Lisa. Will there be an in-person orientation in the, commencement in the fall?
At this point, we're really trying to figure out what is doable. It's hard to tell how many people will actually come to an in-person event, but if there is one, it will be in October, and information will go out to everybody who is eligible. The best place to look is at commencement.uconn.edu, where we post the most up-to-minute information on what we plan on doing.
Thank you, Lisa.
Also, to let you know, it's super important to continue to apply for graduation within student administration. So just because commencement as we know it has been canceled, we are still auditing your degrees and conferring your degrees, but we can't do it if you don't apply first. And if you don't apply, we can't send you information about participating in any commencement exercise.
Thank you, Lisa. A question for Megan, and you did touch upon this earlier, but we've got a couple of questions here about delaying graduation. Megan, can you tell us how a graduate student can delay graduating if they were planning on a May graduation?
So if you already applied for a May graduation and now you need some more time to finish up, you can contact the degree audit team in the registrar's office to change your expected graduation semester. Student administration won't let you reapply for graduation in a different term, but if you just send a quick email with your request and student ID to degree audit, they can make that update for you. If you're running up against your deadline to graduate according to the time limit set in the graduate catalog, you can get an extension of your time to degree deadline. There's a form on the graduate school's website called Request for Extension of Terminal Date for Degree Requirements. That can be completed and emailed to graduatedean@uconn.edu to have your time limit extended and graduation deadline pushed out.
Thank you, Megan. Karen, I'm seeing several questions related to health and wellness. Could you tell us about what health and wellness resources are available to graduate students at this time and how they might access them?
Sure. So pretty much, as far as I can tell, most of the resources that have always been available to students continue to be available to students in different formats. So the folks over at Student Health and Wellness are working hard to make sure that services are available over in the medical care side of things and in the mental health offices. They're doing it mostly through telehealth at this point, but obviously there are some services that will be available directly over in the actual student health building. The pharmacy is open and running. They're doing curbside service at this point, so there'll be no need to enter the building, so you can get in touch with the pharmacy about that. And the folks over at Health Promotions, well, they know that it's a really stressful time for all of us, and so they're doing a bunch of different activities, including meditation Mondays at 6 o'clock and wellness Wednesdays at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays. You can see many of these things on the website that Kent spoke about earlier on for the UKindness initiative that the Student Affairs is working on. The UConn recovery community is still in place. So for those of us who may need to participate in the UConn recovery community, that is there. There are fitness classes that are being offered online. Rec Services is trying hard to ensure that there are ways for us to maintain our physical health, which also obviously contributes to many of our mental health. And as far as the graduate school, I would want you all to know that we're all here, right? So we're all available to you all as we always have been. So if there are things that come up and you're just trying to figure out how to even get this done, or you have an issue that you don't even know where to start with, you can always be in touch with the folks over at graduate school at uconn.edu, or go on the website and contact any of us directly. All of our team are working remotely, but are able to answer by email, have phone conversations, schedule Skype or Zoom or WebEx or whatever works well for y'all to have some contact. We want to make sure that we're here to address your needs. So let us know what they are and we'll help you out specifically or generally.
Thank you, Karen. Kent, another question for you. I have a graduate student here saying that they've been accepted for an internal fellowship for the 2020-2021 academic year. Will they still receive their fellowship funding as normal?
So I think it's important to be clear here on what we mean by internal fellowship. If we mean one of the fellowships awarded by the graduate school, that would be a Crandall, a Harriet, or a Jorgensen. Those will continue as normal. You can count on those. The graduate school also distributes some money, fellowship money, directly to departments. We will be distributing to departments essentially the same amount as last year. And so I would anticipate departments will treat those internal fellowships in the same way as they have in the past, but that's up to the individual departments. In addition, some departments have their own sources of funding for fellowships. The status of those internal fellowships, I don't have any direct knowledge of.
Thank you, Ken. And in a similar vein, there are several questions about UConn extending the tenure clock for faculty. How will the university ensure that funding is extended for graduate students?
Yeah, so I think there are actually two components to that question. One is the question that Megan Petza already referred to, which is extending the time to degree that is specified in the graduate catalog. We do not currently envision a blanket extension of time to degrees for currently enrolled students for two reasons. First of all, for most students, the available time is more than adequate. Most finish at least a year or two quicker than the current deadlines. Furthermore, we have an established process, as Megan referred to consider those circumstances where a student is unable to complete in the usual time. And we will consider those, as always, in this case, being even more sympathetic than we normally are because of the exceptional circumstances surrounding COVID-19. With respect to extending funding, I want to reiterate what I said at the very start, which is our number one priority is to ensure the health and safety of our graduate students and those around them. And second only to that is our emphasis on ensuring that current graduate students are in fact able to successfully complete their degree. And to that end, the university is doing a lot of things to try and find as much funding as possible to ensure that graduate students are able to continue. The president is working actively with the state legislatures and with government leadership in the state to find additional funds from the state, as well as working with our federal representatives to find additional money from the federal government. The VPR's office, the Vice President for Research's office, is working actively with funding agencies to find ways to give actual cost extensions to existing grants so that not only will grants be able to pay research assistants now, but they will be extended for some period in the future to recognize the slowdown so that the graduate students can continue to be paid in the future beyond what they normally would have been paid. Beyond that, the university isn't in a position to offer a blanket assurance with respect to extending funding, but we are committed to working very closely with departments, deans, in individual PIs to do everything we can to ensure that students have the funding they need to complete their degrees. Those reviews will by necessity have to be done one by one, student by student, because every individual student's circumstance will differ, but we will work with you to do what we can.
Thank you, Ken. This is a question in general for the panel. If a grad student does not receive funding for summer, what is going to happen to their health benefits? Can anyone speak to that on the panel?
If a GA had a GA ship through May 21st, 2020, their health insurance does extend through 8/31/20. And that's regardless of summer work. It's related to their spring appointment.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Megan. Another question again for the panel. What is the cost of off-campus enrollment fees for international students compared to the cost of domestic students? Would the university consider making this cost the same?
There's no difference between the fees for international students versus domestic students. The difference is between in-state and out-of-state. I have not yet heard conversations about if there are movements to change that. I would doubt it based on the fact that in-state tuition is based on a tax benefit. It's supported by the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut. So there's not necessarily a fee differential for international students. That helps.
Thank you for that, Karen. Another question regarding telecommuting, and this Megan/Kent question here. We have a question about GA and telecommuting. Can an incoming student start in fall 2020 as a telecommuter on a GATA? And are there differences between domestic and international students in that regards?
So I should probably take that one. There are two pieces to answering that question. One is to remember that any person holding a graduate assistantship must first be a graduate student. And so they would be able to telecommute for their GA responsibilities, presumably only if they're also able to telecommute to enroll as a graduate student. And so that will depend on the course offerings and expectations for that particular graduate program. Some programs, I am aware, are making provisions to offer many or all of their incoming courses online, others are not. And so that piece of it will depend on the particular program. With respect to the GA responsibilities, it will depend on whether or not the expectations associated with the assistantship can be performed remotely. So for example, this semester, teaching assistants are still working as teaching assistants, assisting classes remotely. It might be that a teaching assistant appointed in the fall could perform teaching assistant duties remotely in the same way, or it might not, depending on the course and the department. Research assistants, the same thing. It will depend on the nature of the research assignment, whether or not it requires physical presence on campus. And as I alluded to before, and Jennifer may want to pop in here, there are additional complications with respect to international graduate students having to do with the additional approvals that are necessary for work internationally and for research internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. Kent, you hit it on the mark there. It's remote work within the US right now is okay for the time being, if we're not allowed to physically come into work currently, but remote work in the international context definitely requires special approvals. And there is an informal committee that reviews these individual requests in our office, which is headed by our director, Ray Alexander. So yeah, you're exactly right that it's case by case and can be convoluted.
Thank you very much, Kent and Jennifer. So do any of our panelists have any thoughts or closing thoughts from all the questions you've heard? Are there any things that came to mind as you've been hearing these conversations that you would like to bring to the fore?
Stuart,
Go ahead.
I happened to notice in the chat box one question that I think Carl should probably address specifically. It's related to the e-signatures, but it was specifically about e-signatures on plans of study and how students could get those?
Yeah, so same is true for all paperwork, not just plans of study or final approval pages. E-signatures are fine. The big caveat is provided that all paperwork be submitted directly to the degree audit liaison from your advisor or your associate advisor from their UConn or UCHC email address. So we'll take any means of electronic signature on the form, provided that the method of submitting it is through UConn email address.
Thank you, Carl. Jen, I noticed you might have had something to pop in here.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks so much. I just wanted to go back to the part of delaying graduation. That is a most common question asked for our international graduate students. And I just wanted to put in there that, you know, from an immigration standpoint, a student must have a valid academic reason, an educational reason to extend their Form I-20 or DS 2019. So therefore they should, you know, and as long as they haven't exhausted all the prior prerequisites for such an extension, they should definitely submit their I-20 extension request to our office as soon as they need to, if they do need more time to complete their degree program. I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you, Jen. Another question that just came through, and it was sort of alluded to earlier. Will UConn extend time to completion and funding for graduate students in order to compensate for the professional and research losses caused by the pandemic?
Sorry, Stuart, could you repeat that? I was checking the chat box and didn't quite get it.
No worries. Will UConn extend time to completion and funding for graduate students in order to compensate for the professional and research losses caused by the pandemic?
Yeah, so this is similar to the answer I gave earlier. There won't be automatic extensions of time to degree or funding, but especially with respect to extensions of time to degree, those are things we consider regularly through a process that is documented on the graduate school website, and we will continue to consider them. And especially under these circumstances, it is likely that requests for extension would be approved. With respect to a request for extension of funding, again, there isn't a blanket possibility to guarantee extension of funding, but the graduate school, along with the president's office and the provost's office, will work very closely with departments, deans, and individual PIs to do everything we can to find funding that will ensure that students are able to complete their degree programs.
Thank you, Ken. And I'd like to give a big thanks to all of our panelists today for joining us, but I'd especially like to thank all the graduate students for being here. Once we close out the town hall shortly, you'll be redirected to the graduate school's FAQ page on your browser, and will also be offered the opportunity to give us feedback on today's town hall. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any other questions. Please keep safe and healthy, and I wish you a successful rest of the semester. Thank you.